Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. And there will be some spoilers later, but for the first part of this review it will be spoiler free as much as I can. So the only sort of spoilery bits will be from maybe the sort of first 50 pages of the book or things that you could read about on the blurb, so sort of nothing major being revealed there, but particularly because of the way this book is structured, in terms of we get a fair bit of the ending at the beginning of this book. It seems like that feels quite spoilery, but actually there's a lot to be gained from the story itself, going through and kind of getting to that point. So yeah, that's how that will work, but feel free to log off at that point if you need to, just before spoilers. But to sort of start us off, I really loved this. I loved Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I have not yet read any other books by her, but really intend to, because I keep on hearing fantastic things about them. But The Marriage Portrait, came out just a month or two ago now, and I'm sort of surprised that maybe hasn't been quite as much buzz around it as I would have thought. But I just found this a really stunning read, and I'll talk a little bit about why. So the key premise of this book sort of in many ways starts from how Maggie O'Farrell first came up with the inspiration of it, which was she saw some sort of old paintings, and one of the paintings is of a fairly young girl who is a duchess. And so we get this idea of a young woman who is in the royal court and is having to play this big political game that she's perhaps not fully set up for. I'm going to put this down, it's quite heavy. A big sort of political game that she's not really prepared for. She's, as a young child, her family have sort of known that that's where they're sort of aiming for, what they're going to try and prepare her for, but that doesn't necessarily make the whole thing a lot easier. And sort of linked to the inspiration for that is also the poem My Last Duchess by Robert Browning. Is it Robert Browning? I always get that name wrong. But regardless, it's sort of an interesting kind of idea to sort of start this book, and Maggie O'Farrell was really intrigued by the sort of the power of this young girl, but also what it might mean to be so young and be part of this. And we do get the portrait appear in this book at one point, but the starting point is essentially, like I sort of mentioned earlier, almost the end point as well. We start off in the sort of current day, as it were, of 1561, where Lucrezia, our sort of 16-year-old, is the Duchess, married to the Duke of Ferrara, and is terrified that her husband is going to try and kill her. And we start the book with this sort of idea that she's potentially a little paranoid, but we get the idea that there's probably some truth to it. We just don't know quite how. And as the book starts to unravel, we almost get challenged both sides of that. We start to think a little bit more about how it could be just paranoia, because it seemingly doesn't seem to show up in some ways. But then we also get a lot of things that start to show how the Duke himself might be somewhat dangerous, not only in terms of his violent temper, but also that he's got quite a lot to prove. He has not yet had a legitimate child, and that might seem to hint at the idea that he may be infertile, and that is not something that a duke would want, either not only for himself but also for his public perception. So she is sort of this political pawn in this game, particularly around, she is married off to him somewhat suddenly. It was originally meant to be her sister, but her sister died, so she gets married to him instead, and she has to wait until she turns, well, she's, I think, 13 at the beginning of this book. We have to wait until she has her first period for her then to be sort of eligible to be with the Duke. And so she has this sort of transformation in her life where she basically goes from girlhood and feeling sort of somewhat like she vaguely understands the court and what political games she might need to play in future, to suddenly having a period for the first time and being a little bit freaked out by it. And then as a result, being eligible for marriage and being married off almost straight away. And that is quite a terrifying turn of events for her, because that basically means that she is suddenly thrust into this adult world that she doesn't particularly feel prepared for. And in the meantime, we have the kind of court politics of the two sisters of Alfonso the Duke. And these two sisters seem incredibly untrustworthy at times, where they, she realizes quite early on, Lucrezia, that she can't give much away to them, and she has to play an incredibly careful game with them both. And that's sort of how we start this book, this idea that she's about to go into this brand new world that she's probably ill prepared for, but what's going to happen next? And before I go into some spoiler territory, this bit's still sort of spoiler free, hopefully, or about as much as it can be sort of for the early part of the book. We have a few bits of flashing back to her earlier days and sort of the lead up to this marriage. And we start to learn a little bit more about her family history, and particularly what it's like to be a family who are involved in the court in some way. And we learn about the sort of various political difficulties of this, that she is seen as an outsider because she has Spanish family, but her mother is from Naples, and so this other duke kind of kingdom that the sort of dukedom that she's marrying into is an Italian one, but she's sort of seen as an outsider, not only for being Spanish, but then also she speaks Neapolitan, and that's not the sort of proper Italian of the court. It's its own sort of language and dialect, and so she's always an outsider, and she's always sort of being second guessed, and having this sort of extra layer of difficulty for being able to engage with the world. And before I go into spoilers, I just wanted to sort of note a little bit about the language of this book, because just like Hamnet, which again I adored, this book I think is incredible at kind of in very lyrical sentences telling something really quite profound, but it never feeling like these are overdone sentences of sort of whatever going on. At one point we have about 4 or so pages just dedicated to the first time she's about to have sex with Alfonso the Duke. And it's sort of told all through the perspective of this essentially sort of young teenager who doesn't really know what's happening. She's not really had any education on this. And so everything is sort of terrifying, because she's also aware that not only is she about to have sex for the first time, but that how this sex goes is really going to impact on her ability to stay potentially alive, in the court. And if things don't go right, if the Duke is displeased, then she may be in some real difficulty. And I think, again, that the point of view, like, again, that I really enjoyed in Hamnet, the ability of Maggie O'Farrell to kind of zoom in to a character's thoughts and really tell a whole story through their perception of events, I think is really quite staggering and quite profound. And we learn a great deal about what's happening to her in various moments, and her fears and her hopes, and what she's going to do next. And with that, I'm about to go into some spoiler territory. Feel free to sort of stop the video now if you need to, if you've not read the book yet, or if you plan to soon and yeah, don't want anything spoiled. But I'm about to go into a little bit more. So I've mentioned, obviously, that she thinks that her husband is about to kill her. And this is where the book goes next, really, in terms of how the rest of the story is told. We start to get a growing suspicion of everything that's going on. We start to learn increasingly how dangerous he is. We learn, as I mentioned earlier, about his sort of inability seemingly to have children and what that means, and also the kind of double standard there, that he can have sex with many women, but actually she is expected to be the sort of virginal bride for him. But when she first comes in, a portrait is painted of her, hence, the title of the book. And this portrait is painted by this group of men, but particularly this sort of famous artist and a couple of his apprentices. And purely by accident, one night, she stumbles upon a man who has sort of washed up on shore, seemingly. And this is when she's sort of trying to have some time outside of the court and, just be outside and be her own person. And she discovers this man, and she basically saves his life by sort of feeding him this sort of honey water sort of concoction. And it's sort of revealed that basically he is one of the artists. So he's sort of one of the assistants to the artist. And that he is going to be in large part sort of responsible for making sure this painting is a success. And they basically develop this sort of secret friendship throughout the book, where he is very aware that she is of high rank and cannot, he shouldn't be sort of consorting with her, but equally he sees that she is deeply sort of depressed essentially in the situation and is quite desperate to leave. And so he essentially establishes a breakout plan for her, a way that she can escape. And the book leads towards this ending that we kind of know is coming because of the beginning of the book, where we know that she is going to try and either escape or will die. And we don't really know up until towards the end of the book which way it's going to fall. And particularly something I thought was really profound about this is then we get the scene that I saw really sort of vividly in my mind as I was reading this, because I think it's so brilliantly painted, which is the scene of her escaping, following this path in the sort of early, very, very early mornings. So sort of almost no light, and she's sort of doing all these things, and she's on her way out. But at the same time, we learn about the path that is being taken to her room to kill her. And so we start building toward this sort of inevitable end, and we watch this journey of these men going up the stairs to kill her. But it's not then her, but because of the whole apparatus of secrets of things in the court, we learn that the body is never shown, because it's sort of, the reason that's given for her illness, for her death, is this sort of illness that has sort of, discolored her, and she doesn't look herself. So it would be really deeply unfair to have her go out and be sort of shown to the public. So as a result, the coffin is never opened, which also allows for the fact that we know at this point it's not her. And it ends on this sort of dreamlike sort of sequence almost of the sort of extending out into the future, where we don't really know what the future will hold for her. We don't know what's going to happen next for her, other than she's essentially escaped and she can never really re-reveal herself, because she is meant to be dead, and she's a very well-known face because of this portrait. And so I think overall this is just such a stunning book in how it captures not only the sort of drama of the court, but also this really vivid inner life of Lucrezia, who is just such a fascinating character, because she's sort of bold and plucky in many ways, but also completely hamstrung by a really difficult set of circumstances, and is navigating all of this while being sort of 16 or so. So I found this really deeply moving, and particularly the idea of us trying to see her as this sort of paranoid figure at the beginning, and slowly realizing what may actually be happening. So this was a 5-star read for me. I think it's a stunning book, and I'd really love to hear your thoughts on it. I hope you've enjoyed it, if you've had a chance to read it. And also, please, if you've read any other Maggie O'Farrell's apart from this and Hamlet, I'd love to read them. I really want to read her memoir, I think it is I Am. But please, any other recommendations would be fab. I've been Bob the Booker, talking about The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.